The Holy Gospel according to Luke, the 23rd chapter.
Glory to you, O Lord.
When they came to the place that is called the Skull, they crucified Jesus there with the criminals, one on his right and one on his left. Then Jesus said, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing." And they cast lots to divide his clothing. And the people stood by watching, but the leaders scoffed at him, saying, "He saved others, let him save himself if he is the Messiah of God, his chosen one." The soldiers also mocked him, coming up and offering him sour wine and saying, "If you are the king of the Jews, save yourself." There was also an inscription over him, "This is the King of the Jews." One of the criminals who were hanged there kept deriding him and saying, "Are you not the Messiah? Save yourself and us." But the other rebuked him, saying, "Do you not fear God, since you are under the same sentence of condemnation? And we indeed have been condemned justly, for we are getting what we deserve for our deeds. But this man has done nothing wrong." Then he said, "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom." He replied, "Truly I tell you, today you will be with me in paradise." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord.
You may be seated. Over the course of the past week, I've had the privilege of sitting with various groups as we read the scriptures for this day. And in those privileged conversations, I heard a variety of themes come through, and so it seemed appropriate to start in those places, kind of dancing through the scriptures, if you will. We started by hearing Jeremiah, and in Jeremiah there is a warning. Woe to those shepherds who have brought on the destruction of the nation and the scattering of the people. Now, people who know good Old Testament prophets knew and understand that what is going on there is shepherds is a metaphor for the kings. And so there are kings who have brought down the destruction of Israel, of Judah. And the people have been scattered or are about to be scattered. It's not completely clear, but what's happening is there is destruction at the door. But Jeremiah also brings promise. The promise is that there will be another kind of king, another shepherd, a shepherd who comes from the lineage of David. One who will come and in his coming will bring with him justice and righteousness, will bring security and life. This king, this shepherd, will not be like all those other shepherds who have been rather self-serving. This one will be named, "The Lord is our righteousness." As Lutherans, we hear this promise as a promise that points towards the one we know, Jesus. And so today we hear in the gospel reading about his enthronement. But the odd thing is, when we think about a coronation or an enthronement of a king, it usually doesn't happen on a place called the skull or on a cross. We're reminded that in Luke's gospel, it's all about reversals, all about the ways that when the reign of God comes into our presence, things get turned upside down. They go against the way that we expect them to. Just as a quick review, in Luke's gospel, it starts at the very beginning with a priest. He should know the Lord. He should be able to recognize the word of the Lord. He goes into that holy place to do his ministry, and an angel appears before him. And what does he do? He doesn't believe. In fact, he gets struck mute for it. But there's this girl, way young, from a town out in the sticks. Nobody would expect her to hear and believe. And yet Mary does. Reversals. And Mary, after she visits her cousin, she sings this song, and in the song she rehearses the ways in which God's reign will come to bear. And in that, those who are high and mighty and in powerful places will be brought down, and the people who are lowly and oppressed will be raised up. Those who are full of good things will go away hungry, and those who are hungry will be filled with good things. Over and over, she rehearses ways that in God's reign, in God's kingdom, it gets turned upside down. And Jesus, when he's born, one would expect that the king would come and be born in at least a palace, if nothing else, the temple, in at least a town of some merit, in Jerusalem or Rome or something like that. But instead he's born in an exurb, in a place out beyond the bounds a little bit, in Bethlehem. And when they announce it, when that angelic host comes to announce it, not in Rome, not in Jerusalem, to shepherds. We're talking on the socioeconomic scale, these folks are about as low as you can get in that culture. That's where the announcement comes. All through Luke, it gets upended. And so today, it should be no surprise that it is in Jesus being crucified that we witness Jesus being enthroned as the King. It is in weakness and vulnerability and on the edge of death that God works the final victory. That everything gets turned right side up according to God's reign. It is on the cross that as they put him up there, Jesus announces forgiveness. Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they're doing. And isn't it interesting that almost immediately after that, as the crowd is standing around, there are all these people. By the way, crucifixions are supposed to scare everybody away. But all these people have gathered around, and you have the religious leaders. And what do? They scoff at him. And you know what? When people start behaving in those ways, it gets a little bit infectious. And so the soldiers, they also mock him. And just in case that's not enough, a fellow criminal, hung right next to him, begins to deride him. If you're the Messiah, save yourself and us. What's interesting, in the midst of all of that, it was in one of those conversations, Pastor Mike said, you know, if you listen closely, in their own way, each of them are asking for salvation. And there's that other one on the other cross. Which way was I pointing? I'm lost. That other one who says, don't you know that we are up here under the same condemnation that he is, and we deserve everything that we're getting, and he is an innocent man. Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. It is in the surprising places. It is in the upside down places. It is in the unexpected places that God is revealed. God works salvation, not through military or political power or strength, but in vulnerability and service and forgiveness and apparent weakness. In case we miss the point, in Colossians, the author of that letter to that congregation in Colossae decides to lay it all out. And let's face it, this is probably one of the most definitive articulations of who Jesus is that there is. I'm going to read it just to remember, all right? Here we go. Jesus is the image of the invisible God. He is the firstborn of all creation. He is the one through whom all things were created. He is the one who holds all things together. He is the head of the body, the church. He is the firstborn of the dead. He is first place among everything. Through him, God reconciles everything to God's self. Seems like a pretty big deal. Pretty universal, expansive. So today we gather to celebrate Christ the King Sunday, this day when this one who is the firstborn of the dead, this one who is the first among all things, this individual, this person, this God who is human, who walked with us, who is with us, and who will continue to be with us. We celebrate his reign in our lives because he is the same. And it is his name that is above every name. Now, St. Paul wrote in one place, Jesus is Lord. And that is what we are here to celebrate today, that Jesus is Lord. But that had implications in that time. Those were words of insurrection. Because if Jesus is Lord, that means Caesar is not. If Jesus is Lord, then the temple is not. If Jesus is Lord, then the treasury is not. If Jesus is Lord, then all that land and livestock and property and all those possessions that people were putting their trusts in is not. The list goes on and on. Now, many years ago, in one of the classrooms of a church in a faraway place, there was a chalkboard. And on that chalkboard, as the students were studying the first commandment, they started to spend some time thinking about what were the things in their lives that risked inviting them into trusting those things over and against God. What were the things that seduced them into putting their trust in those things? so that they would become gods for them. Maybe you have your list. Maybe you're already starting to work on it yourself. What are the things that invite you to trust in them, and in the process distract you from trusting in God above all things? Here's a starter list. This came from one of those conversations this week. If Jesus is Lord, then power is not. If Jesus is Lord, then wealth is not. If Jesus is Lord, then security is not. All those ways that we try to seek those things on our own. If Jesus is Lord, then that is above and beyond our family or our friends or even our relationships that we so easily start to trust in above God. If Jesus is Lord, then politicians and the government is not. If Jesus is Lord, then all those gadgets and all that technology is not. If Jesus is Lord, then social media is not. If Jesus is Lord, maybe you have your own list. If Jesus is Lord, then these other created things are not. As we come together, we celebrate that indeed, if Jesus is Lord, then what we bring to worship, what we bring here as our offering of thanks and praise to God, what we bring here and place in the offering plate is a sign that points to the way that we give all of ourselves, all that we have, all that we are, to God and to His reign and to His authority in our lives. For indeed, Jesus Christ is the King of all creation. And by His authority, and through Him, the one that we see enthroned today, you have been made free.